Is Leighton Flowers a Pelagian? The answer might be concerning. We're going to go through a concerning article here today. This article is by Bobby Groh, who is apparently a co-author of several books. What I'd like to see out of this is just how weak these arguments are. Now, I'm not even talking about I disagree with them. I don't mean to say the argument is weak as code for I disagree. I'm talking about the structure of the argument here, and that he gets kind of some basic facts wrong that harms his credibility when he says other things. And you should see the comments here in the section. And we're going to go through this. But I see the structure of his argument is so weak. Now, we posted a clip of Dr. Flowers going through some of the primary sources for Pelagianism here. And so we're not going to repeat that on this one. And I'm going to let Dr. Flowers defend himself as regard to the charge of Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism. But this article, the bar is set so low. The threshold of evidence is set so low, and yet he makes Bobby here makes such strong statements based upon this evidence, this low bar of evidence that he has set for himself. And so I want to go through this here. The answer might be concerning, so it might be maybe it's not. Maybe the answer isn't concerning, but it might be. It might be concerning. What did the infamous Pelagius teach about human agency within the broader category of anthropology? This is the question that has seemingly plagued the church throughout her history. We have Augustine Pelagius, Luther Erasmus, Calvin Pigius, I guess I don't know how to pronounce that, Council of Dort and Remonstrance, and so forth. So things have been going back and forth on this forever. The struggle will not go away. That's true. And if this article is any indication, it won't be. I have once again been provoked to enter this fray myself, not because I think this binary is a useful one, but it really sure is a useful one, isn't it? I mean, it sure is a useful one, because you get to say things like Dr. Flowers is a Pelagian, Provisionism is Pelagianism, and then just never say anything else, right? You just say it's Pelagianism, and then you don't have to deal with any of its positions. You don't have to argue against it. You don't have to show how it's bad biblically, wrong, unbiblical, bad theology, bad philosophy. You don't have to show any of that. You just say it's Pelagianism, and then you can ride off into the sunset having declared victory. So it is pretty useful, admittedly, right? The provocateur for me has been popular level podcaster and YouTuber Leighton Flowers. So Leighton Flowers is ensnaring others within the broader Christian body. And he's a provocateur, okay? This is starting out great, right? Provocateur, all right. I guess because he disagrees with you, he's provocative. He disagrees with Reformed theology, he's provocative. I don't know. He doesn't really say outlandish things. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I've engaged with him before through a few blog posts, and you can read up on those here, and maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do some of those here. I don't know. Without rehashing the nitty-gritty of Flowers' approach, which he calls Provisionism, what is at greatest rub with his whole proposed system reduces down to the question that Pelagius has come to be known, for indeed Pelagius has come to be known as the I'm not educated enough. I don't know what this means. Of the church because of this. Flowers just did a podcast where he takes issue, this issue takes center stage. I suspect that this is the podcast that we clipped from just pretty recently, i.e. the human agent's moral capacity to know or to not know God. I responded here via a podcast on my own, okay? For the remainder of this post, we will attempt to offer a précis of Pelagius' view on human free will and compare that to what Leighton Flowers presents. Okay, let's do that. A précis of Pelagius' view on human free will. Okay. What should stand out by the end of this post is that to Flowers' protestations, his position fits with Pelagius' perspective much more than he would like. Okay, But if you are a Calvinist, in fact, if you are a Christian, any kind of Protestant, a Presbyterian, who affirms the Trinity and affirms the hypostatic union of Christ and affirms especially infant baptism, then your position might be closer to Catholicism than you like. Is that how this works now? Do we just kind of say positions are wrong because of who you kind of agree with or who you're kind of close to? Do we just call someone a Catholic or a Pelagian because they're kind of close to it more than they would like, maybe? Is that how this works now? Is that the standard we're setting up now? So should we just call you what? Fatalists? Because I presume and I claim that your position is closer to a fatalist than you would like or closer to a determinist than you would like? Is that a valid argument? I don't think you would find it so, Bobby. It will be concluded that Flower's position isn't simply equivocally related to Pelagius, but instead that Flowers operates with a form of the Pelagian position that in the history has come to be known as semi-Pelagianism. Okay, so is Flowers a Pelagian? Already no. We've already, see how is Flowers a Pelagian? He answered the question already, no, he's not, because it's semi-Pelagianism. So it might not, the answer might be concerning, but since you already answered the question, is Flowers a Pelagian, with the answer no, then it might not be concerning. In order to make a genuine attempt at representing Flowers' view accurately, I will quote directly from the statement of faith he has posted on his website. The statement of faith is used to be representative of the majority of Southern Baptists. Flowers is, by self-confession, within this majority. That's correct. I will quote a large section of the statement for context since it has to do with the very question under consideration. Dr. Flowers went through an article where Dr. Adam Harwood goes through this and shows how it can't be semi-Pelagianism. If you want to engage more deeply with that, that's fine. I'm going to skip down here and go to his actual argument. Keep the aforementioned in mind, he says. Okay, we didn't read it, but we'll keep it in mind. We'll go back to it if we need to. Now we will turn to a reading of Pelagius' understanding of human nature and free will. I will refer to my friend Nick Needham's synopsizing of that. So Pelagius' understanding of human nature and free will, this is his friend Nick Needham summarizing that. Now he does go on down here to footnote Nick, and this is a Christian Focus publication, 2,000 Years of Christ's Power, Volume 1, The Age of the Early Church Fathers. Okay, it's a quote from that, but this isn't Pelagius's words. This isn't what Pelagius said he taught, and that will come into focus here in a minute. Unfortunately for Pelagius, his ardent zeal for holy living was wedded to a rather unorthodox theology. Okay? Although his doctrine of God was Catholic enough, he believed in the Nicene doctrine of the Trinity, his beliefs, and so do you. So you believe in the Nicene doctrine of the Trinity. So just like that, you guys are Catholic enough. See how that works? His beliefs about human nature sparked off a storm of controversy, which ended in his condemnation for heresy. Pelagius held that all human beings were born into the world as sinless as Adam was before the fall, before he fell. This is we actually have no evidence that this statement is correct. And what I mean by that is that Pelagius, every time he was asked, he denied this position. So when he was, and we're going to go through this, according to Augustine's own account of the synod, in which Pelagius was put to the question as to this heresy, he denied holding to it. And then 4 years later, at Carthage, Pelagius was, and this Carthage was 418 to 419, 4 years earlier in 414, at that synod, when he was questioned, Pelagius was found not guilty. It was a legal proceeding. He was found to be in line with Catholic teaching, and he was not anathematized. 4 years later, in absentia, when he wasn't there, then, and he couldn't answer questions and nobody could question him, and he couldn't defend himself, then he was condemned as a heretic. So 4 years before, when he denied he believed any of these things that they're about to say he believes, And then 4 years later, when he isn't there to deny them again, presuming he would, we have no evidence that he's in those 4 years started believing those things he previously denied, then he's declared a heretic. So we actually have no evidence that this is the case. The apostasy of Adam had not corrupted humanity's nature, but had merely set a fatally bad example, which most of Adam's sons and daughters had freely followed. Dr. Flowers and every provisionist that I know, anyone from the traditional Southern Baptist view, Dr. Allen, Dr. Harwood denies this view that had not corrupted human nature. They deny it outright. So there's that. However, there were some people, according to Pelagius, who had managed to remain sinless throughout their lives by proper use of their free will. Okay. We have no evidence that Pelagius actually claimed this. He denies to have done so. Some of the Old Testament saints like Daniel. In fact, anyone can become sinlessly perfect if only he tried hard enough. Okay. Pelagius admitted, of course, that human beings needed God's grace in order to be good, but he had his own peculiar definition of grace. For Pelagius, grace really meant two things: God's gift of natural free will to all human beings, and God's gift of the moral law and the example of Christ, which revealed perfectly how people should live and supplied strong incentives in the forms of eternal rewards and punishments. Pelagius' theology, therefore, made the fruits of human goodness grow almost entirely out of human free will and effort. Entry into heaven in the Pelagian scheme has become just a reward for living a good life on earth rather than an undeserving gift purchased for the helpless sinners by the blood of an all-sufficient Savior. Again, these are the positions attributed to Pelagius that Pelagius expressly denies and is found not guilty in 414. Okay? And Augustine recounts the synod and recounts Pelagius' denial of this, and that the bishops there are satisfied with Pelagius' account and consider him not guilty of these heresies. Based on Needham's description, which is a good one, the common we will come across in any sound patristic theology book. So what they're doing is they're describing accurately the position as it was described in the 5th century, and they're ascribing it to Pelagius and leaving out the part where Pelagius denied, on record, denies having taught these things. So this kind of doesn't bode well for Bobby's credibility here and the rest of what he's about to say. We can see some similarities and dissimilarities between what Flowers and the Baptists affirm and what Pelagius ostensibly affirms. Similarities and dissimilarities. Is that all it takes to be labeled something? Having some similarities and dissimilarities? Is it okay to label you a Catholic? Is it okay to label you a fatalist, determinist, a Gnostic? Is that okay? Is that a good argument? Is that a strong argument to label you with those things because you have some similarities and dissimilarities with them? It is the deny section of the Article 2 from the statement above where we find the greatest similarity between Pelagius and Flowers. Okay, this is the greatest similarity. To reiterate that section, it says, we deny that Adam's sin resulted in the incapacitation of any person's free will or rendered any person guilty before he has personally sinned. While no sinner is remotely capable of achieving salvation through his own effort, we deny that any sinner is saved apart from the free response to the Holy Spirit's drawing through the gospel. I affirm that position. That sounds about right. Okay. Pelagius held, so in comparison, Pelagius' position according to Needham, again, according to Needham, not according to Pelagius, but according to Needham, Pelagius held that all human beings were born into the world as sinless as Adam before he fell. The apostasy of Adam had not corrupted humanity's nature. Do you see this sleight of hand here? This is one reason why this is so weak. All human beings are born into the world as sinless as Adam before he fell. Sure, in the sense that we deny that Adam's sin resulted in the incapacitation of anyone's free will or rendered any person guilty before he has personally sinned. So in the sense that he's not guilty, he's sinless. But then he smuggles into the phrase sinless, he smuggles in had not corrupted humanity's nature. Had not corrupted humanity's nature. So he smuggles that idea in as if you have to be sinful and guilty of Adam's sin, a sin you didn't commit, in order to be corrupted by Adam's sin. Just simply doesn't follow. It's a bad argument. It's weak. It doesn't work. I can have human nature be corrupted by Adam's sin, and we believe that it is, without also being guilty of Adam's sin. I can be born sinless and corrupted. I can be born sinless because I haven't sinned, but corrupted and born into a sinful world, in a sinful system where I'm going to be taught to sin by everyone around me. I can be born into that kind of sinful system with a weak flesh because of Adam's sin that has corrupted the world and corrupted my flesh, but actually not sinful until I actually sin. That's our position. And if you want to have a strong argument, you're going to have to deal with that position, what our position actually is. Pelagius admitted, of course, that human beings needed grace in order to be good. For Pelagius, grace really meant two things: God's gift of natural free will to all human beings. But isn't that a gracious gift? Is not free will grace? It's not the only thing that grace is. And if that is the Pelagian position, then that is wrong, and that is the position that was condemned, both in 14:14 and 14:18. That was condemned. But if this is the case, that it's true that God's gift of natural free will to all human beings is actually a gracious gift, then what's wrong with that? If you haven't argued that this is wrong, you just argued that Pelagius held to it. Pelagius holding to something doesn't make it wrong. Remember, Pelagius himself was cleared when he was present, when he was there. He was cleared. So he shares a lot of the same beliefs you do. So Pelagius holding to this position doesn't make it wrong. He held to the Trinity. Does that make it wrong? Of course not. You have to show how this is wrong. How is it not a part of God's grace that human beings have free will? I selected the aspects of this respective anthropologies that I think presents the greatest similarities between Flowers and Pelagius. While there is not a one-to-one correlation, there is a correlation between the way Flowers believes humanity retained a person's free will post-fall and the way Pelagius maintained that human beings were born with an uncorrupted human nature, as that refers to free will. So both, it's not a one-to-one correlation. See, it's not the same, but he's still a Pelagian. See, his position, Flowers' position, isn't the same. It's not one-to-one correlation. It's not equal to, it's not even a one-to-one correlation, but he is a Pelagian, though. See how weak this argument is? This argument is so weak. He's setting the bar so low, but then still calling Flowers a Pelagian. And he calls him a semi-Pelagian in this article, but in the comments, he calls him a full-blown Pelagian. You'll see. As Needham points out, so it's not a one-to-one correlation, but it is correlated in some way. That's his argument. As Needham points out, for Pelagius, grace was what fortifies the uncorrupted or retained freedom of the will within the human agent. But isn't that true? He gave us the free will as a gift, and he can come along and give us strength to choose right things with our free will. How is that wrong? Show us how that is wrong, not just state that Pelagius held to that position. There's some obvious distinction between Flowers and Baptist and Pelagius, such as Pelagius' sort of naturalist, full-blown moralistic soteriology, and the way that Flowers attempts to soften that with a more classical soteriological framework. So see the language here? See, he has to slip in these little things to make it seem like Dr. Flowers is as nefarious as possible. It isn't that Flowers outright denies a moralistic soteriology, but he just tries to soften it. It's just a mamby-pamby answer, and he just tries to soften a little bit. He just really is a Pelagian, but he tries to whisper and snicker and wink, and he just tries to soften it a little bit. Not that he full-blown denies it. No, of course not. He softens it. See the sleight of hand here? See the little linguistic tricks they have to use to strengthen the argument that just isn't there? What of concern is the way they share a highly similar theological anthropology in regards to human capacity of free will vis-a-vis salvation. Here's a huge statement. Are you ready for this? This is the locus classicus that led the early church to identify Pelagia's teaching as heretical. Wait, what is? What is the locus classicus? What is of concern is the way they share a highly similar theological anthropology in regard to human capacity's free will vis-a-vis salvation. So since that's the locus, that's the thing that centers around, and what they condemned was that human beings have free will in salvation. Is that really what was condemned in the 5th century? I'm going to show you that it's not. Let's go over there and look. And all I did here, what's funny, all I did here was I just Googled like armchair theologian. I don't have I'm not a co-author of any books. I don't go to Princeton. I have a seminary degree, but I don't go to Princeton. I'm just a guy with the Google machine. And I just typed in words into the Google machine. What was Pelagius anathematized for? And I found Augustine's own account of the synod in which Pelagius was grilled, in which he was interviewed and questioned. This is the extract from Augustine's Retractions, Book 2, Chapter 45. This is extracts from this book, okay, from Augustine's Retractions. All right, this is what this is from, and this is a recounting of the synod, and he wrote this at 417, and this helped power getting Pelagius back under another synod. And this is on the proceedings of Pelagius. Earlier, I made the claim that Pelagius was not condemned at this synod in 414. So let's look at that. Pelagius' acquittal becomes suspected. So he is acquitted. These are the proceedings by which Pelagius' friends rejoice that he was exculpated. We, on our part, since he took much pains to prove that we were well affected towards him, by going so far as to produce even our private letters to him and reading them at the trial. So they all wrote friendly letters to him, including Augustine and the bishops opposed to him. And he said, no, you guys are actually my friends. And he is acquitted for this. And there's another guy who was this guy, Colistius, who was condemned at Carthage. And then they were saying, oh yeah, you know who was Colistius' teacher? Well, Pelagian. Pelagian was Colistius' teacher. So Pelagius. So let's get Pelagius in here and let's question him. But he knew nothing of, especially in the absence, who had put the indictment against him. He denies teaching these things. But he expressed himself as he has never entertained any other opinion than those which stated in his replies to the satisfaction of the judges. So he is acquitted here. Now, since we have received satisfaction of the points which have come before us touching the monk Pelagius, who has been present since too, he gives his consent to the pious doctrines and even anathematizes everything that is contrary to the church's faith. So everything that, what's his name? Needham, everything that Needham points out in Bobby Grove's article, Pelagius has anathematized. In his own words, according to Augustine, anathemized him. Okay? But what was condemned at this synod? If not Pelagius, then what position was condemned? History of the Pelagian heresy. The Pelagian heresy was raised by sundry persons who affected the monastic state. So this is something that has been affecting people. And here is the position that was condemned. This is very important. Here's the position that was condemned. You know, we knew there would be heresies, right? There must be also heresies among you that are approved, maybe manifest among you. So for 1 Corinthians 11, there's going to be heresies. After they have these older heresies that have just now been introduced, not by bishops or presbyters or the rank of the clergy, no, but by monks. Ooh, what would be monks? A heresy which disputes under color of defending free will. Now, remember what Bobby Grove claims Pelagius was condemned for was that at the moment of salvation, that humans have free will. This is one of those things that brings Bobby Grove's credibility unto question, because he gets these, and it's just the weakness of the argument, because he gets these basic facts wrong. And one of the facts is that the monks that were employing this heresy were doing it under color of defending free will. They weren't actually defending free will. Because if they were actually defending free will, that would be okay. They were claiming to defend free will, which is a good thing. See what this means? Under color of defending free will. So they were using the defense of free will, which is a good thing according to Augustine apparently, to teach their heresy. So if they were actually defending free will, that would have been okay. They weren't condemned for defending free will. They were condemned for not actually defending free will. That they were using free will as a cover, as a guise, in order to get their heresy through. Do you see the difference there? If they were condemned for teaching free will, if Pelagius was condemned, or the Pelagian heresy, whoever was teaching it, was condemned for it being free will, he wouldn't have said this. He would have said they were just condemned for teaching free will. No, they were pretending to defend free will, but what they were actually doing is they were actually attacking this doctrine. By one man death, and by one man the resurrection of the dead, for as in Adam all die, even so Christ shall be made alive. So they were ruining this. Men were dead through Adam, for as in Adam all die. They were messing with that, and they were saying they were defending free will, but really they were just messing with that. Because defending free will would be okay if that's what they were doing. And they deny God's help in our actions by affirming that in order to avoid sin and to fulfill righteousness, human nature can be sufficient. See, it wasn't that they were teaching people had free will and that was condemned. It was that human nature is sufficient to avoid sin. That was condemned. That free will, you can just choose not to sin, and there's no effect. There's no effect on the human will that leads you to sin. That's what they were condemned for, not for defending free will. Seeing that it has been created with free will, see, they affirmed free will, and that God's grace lies in the fact that we have been so created as to be able to do this by the will, and in further fact that God has given us the assistance of his law and commandments, also in that he forgives their past sins when he turns to him. So it wasn't that free will was condemned at this synod, along with Pelagian who wasn't condemned. It wasn't free will that was condemned. It was saying that just by free will, you can live a sinless life and follow all the commandments. And all that God's grace is giving you free will and giving you the commandments to follow you and giving you the ability to do it and saying, here, see ya. God's just like, peace, you can do it. You got it. That's what they're being condemned for, not just saying people have free will. This is assumed. It's assumed that people have free will by Augustine here. No one's going against the fact that this isn't about arguing against free will. This isn't a disputation about whether or not men have free will. It's a given by both sides that men have free will. See that? So Bobby Grow is just historically incorrect here. Right here it is, by Augustine's own words, what they were condemned for. They were condemned for saying God's grace is just, here's the free will, here's the commandments, you can do it, see ya. And there was no nature of corruption. There was nothing that leads men's wills to sin. Grace wasn't needed in order to be better, in order to be a better Christian, in order to make better choices, and in order to come to God. God's grace wasn't needed for any of those things. It was just free will. That's what was condemned, not simply free will. Augustine goes on very verbosely here, and this is towards even the end of it, to go back and forth about the little minutia over what they were disagreeing with. But the point is that they were not disagreeing over free will. That was not what this dispute was about. That was not what this guy Coelistius was condemned for. He wasn't condemned for believing in free will. The heresy that was condemned wasn't for believing in free will. That's not what it was about at all. So we return to Bobby Grow's claim that free will is the locus classicus that led to the early church to identify Pelagius' teaching as heretical. No, it's not. And if I can read Bobby as charitably as possible here, what he may be saying, what we may be understanding here, is that in regard to humanity's capacity for free will and salvation means that all that is needed is free will. All that is needed is free will. Even if I take him in the best way possible, that maybe he isn't just factually incorrect here. I think he is. I think he is historically just incorrect about what the dispute was about and what Pelagius was condemned for 4 years after he wasn't condemned, but what the heresy was about. But even if I take him as understanding all that, when he says that Flowers is similar, Dr. Flowers is similar to the view of free will, that all that is needed is free will, and you can just follow the law, you can just live a sinless life and come to God completely on your own, and that the only grace that is needed is the existence of free will, that's just misleading then. I guess the best way I could take it, either he's completely unaware of what the historical doctrine is here. And I think that's the case because the reason I think that's the case is because my other option is that he is actively deceiving then. Because it's demonstrably different to say that men have free will, as everyone in that dispute in the 5th century agreed with. Everyone just assumed that free will is a part of it, and both sides agreed with free will. He's either mistaken or he's being deceptive, that it's just about free will, as opposed to a certain view of free will that says that there's no grace needed. And he is just putting that out there without showing how many times or acknowledging how many times Dr. Flowers has said ad nauseum, almost on every broadcast ever, that the gospel message is required. You can disagree that that's correct. You can disagree with that. That's fine. But to make it seem like Dr. Flowers thinks that all you need is just the choice, and the choice isn't a response to God's gracious appeal in the gospel first, is misleading. And so I'd rather than see him as purposefully misleading people by leaving out what Dr. Flowers actually believes about free will, that it is a response, not just something that people come up with. I can't tell you how many times he said this. I would rather see him as just factually incorrect about what the dispute was about. There's so much more that I can be said, he continues. I haven't even started critiquing Flowers' position for my own theological program. That will have to wait for another day. We haven't even applied concepts like created grace or, Thomist and intellectualist anthropology, or considered concepts like operative and cooperative grace when it comes to Flowers' vision. But I wanted to at least attempt to show that there is a serious and substantial connection between these Southern Baptists and Flowers teach when compared to what Pelagius taught in regard to the retention of the so-called human free will. But that's not what you said. Number one, that's not what you said. You said there was some similarity. Not serious and substantial, you just said some. You said it's not a one-to-one correlation, but there is some sort of correlation. And that it's similar. It's similar. You didn't show any sort of serious and substantial connection. You didn't even try to do that. So that's not what you did. And also, what Pelagius taught in regard to the retention of the so-called human free will, the version of free will that Dr. Flowers teaches is the same version of free will that Augustine taught and Augustine affirmed prior to 410 AD. It's the same free will that the bishops who affirmed Pelagius and condemned the heresy were affirming. That's the kind of free will that Dr. Flowers teaches. The kind of freedom where men have a choice. Early in my post, I noted that I would place Flowers' position when considered from the historical violence into the semi-Pelagian category. I would do that just at the point where we see Flowers Baptists attempting to address the soteriological understanding within classical and even Orthodox categories, at least linguistically. See, they talk like they're Orthodox. But really, we know what they mean behind the scenes, kind of, right? I mean, they talk like it, but really they're Pelagian heretics. But when we dress that down, we end up with this underlying and nagging understanding of a retained free will. Again, he simply repeats. This is why I think he just doesn't understand what the dispute was about, actually, because he just repeats it that it was about a retained free will post-fall. No, it wasn't. It's factually incorrect, as we read. It was about what that free will can do. No one was saying it couldn't make choices. No one didn't say it didn't exist. But is it just enough? Is it that superpower that God gives you to be able to live a sinless life? Dr. Flowers steadfastly denies that position, and that's the position that was condemned at the synod. And Pelagius himself taught and was anathematized for, except he denied teaching it and wasn't anathematized until 4 years after he was approved. Even in the denies we paid attention to, the statement says that ultimately the choice is the person's, that is, that is understanding from what already was affirmed in regard to the retention of human free will, even in the idea of pneumatic wooing is referenced. This is what Flowers and company cannot get past. At bottom, they affirm that internal to the human agent is within the human agent's power to respond or not to the wooing of the Holy Spirit's prompting. Yes, and this is not the position that was condemned at the synod as we just read. According to Augustine, this was not the position. Not that the agent's power was to respond to the wooing of the Holy Spirit's prompting, but that the Holy Spirit wasn't even required anymore. The Holy Spirit wasn't required. The Holy Spirit could help you live a healthier, more sinful life. Okay, fine. But it wasn't required to respond to. Simply not the position that was condemned. If the person responds in the affirmative to the wooing, Flowers will say this is because of God's grace. If they reject the wooing, they will say is because it's their prerogative to do so because of their free will. No. But he'll also say that if they respond to the affirmative of the wooing, it is because of God's grace in cooperation with human free will. That's yes. And free will isn't a work. Free will isn't a superpower. It's because of God's grace. Without God's grace, we have nothing. Without God's grace, we have nothing. But he would still say people can respond and have free will or not. If they reject this wrong, he will say it is because of their prerogative to do so, not because of their free will. Do you see how he's just repeating Flowers' argument and then just assuming it's wrong without showing it's wrong? I mean, this seems like a pretty strong argument. Yeah, if they respond to God's grace, then it's because of God's grace, which they could not have responded to without it. But if they reject it, then it's because of their free will. Yeah, exactly. How is that wrong or biblical or unbiblical? Either way, the response isn't motivated by grace or no grace. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Flowers is saying this is because of God's grace. The response isn't motivated by grace or no grace. It's motivated by grace. The offer of reconciliation to sinners is motivated by grace, by God's grace. It is funded by the human agent's inherent capacity of free will to either reach out and take hold of God's grace or not. But free will isn't a superpower. You can't just do things that aren't in your capacity. I can't respond to an offer that's not given to me. I can't choose to become a named partner in a law firm just because I choose it. It's not a superpower. I don't wink and get the thing that I want. I don't know what position he's arguing against here. No one believes that free will is a superpower where you just wink and get what you want. In a human agent's inherent capacity of free will, I don't know what he's talking about. Capacity to do what? Respond to God's grace? Yes. Come to God on their own? No. Fly off of a building because they wanted to? No. Free will is not a superpower. This doesn't even fit into what Aquinas et al. Would refer to as cooperative grace. Grace in Flowers et al. Approach is always external to the human agent. Yes, that's because he's not Augustinian. He's not Reformed. We're not Reformed, so the grace is external. We don't believe in irresistible grace. See, that's what this is. What this is, watch this. Grace in Flowers et al. Approach is always external to the human will, and this is why Flowers' logical position can rightly be labeled Pelagian. Okay, so now we're Pelagian. We're back to Pelagian now. Okay, so first it was, not a one-to-one correlation. Some similarities, it's kind of similar, but now he's full-blown Pelagian. This is why this is a deeply cynical way to argue, because what this basically says is because you're not Reformed, because you don't hold to the 5 points of TULIP, therefore you're a Pelagian. We don't believe in irresistible grace because we reject Reformed theology. We reject tulip. We're not Calvinists. So yes, the grace is external. That's not what the Pelagian heresy was. The Pelagian heresy, you don't get to just make up what the Pelagian heresy was. You don't get to make up what the Pelagian controversy was about. It wasn't about the grace being external to the human agent. It was about the grace being not necessary to be perfect. That's what it was about. It was about free will being the grace and the law that you can just follow being the grace and nothing else. That's not it. That's not what the Pelagian dispute was about. As I reflect on this is not even the same. Even the semi might not well be applicable to his position at all. See, he did that in here. He goes, thank you, Bobby, for thoughts and ideas on Flowers et al. True color. It widens my perspective on doing some counter argument against Flowers et al. They go off the rail, non-negotiable de jure grace as God as the one who decides, not man. They have exalted the heretic Pelagius. Nobody do that. This is, I don't know if this is a lie or if it's just somebody's mistaken or they're like, oh, this is what I think you're doing. I don't know, but we don't read Pelagius. We don't know who he is in terms of like, oh, we know exactly what he taught or here's his commentary. We read it all the time. We don't exalt. I don't even know what this means. And lambasted Augustine. Yeah. We're not Augustinians. We're not post 410 Augustinians. We're pre 410 Augustinians. We think he's pretty great before he does all his craziness against Pelagius in 410, where he completely flips and starts going against free will and starts teaching the total inability of man and all that. Yeah. Before that, we think Augustine's great. After 410, we're not Augustinians. That's Augustinians. That's kind of obvious. He must be honest enough to accept publicly that as a Pelagian. No, actually, you need to be honest enough to know what Pelagianism is and then acknowledge how many times, according to Reformed scholars, what Pelagianism is. Go check out that other video. And how many times Flowers has denied this. Yeah, JT, thank you. He's not going to accept what his view lands in regard to his, somewhere he says that he was going to, I did in my post, or as I conclude my post, clear the Flowers isn't just semi, but full blown. So he changes it as after he wrote it. Much to consider. I will leave with this. Good intentions, which Flowers has. I don't know how heretics have good intentions. I actually don't understand that one. Okay. High piety, which Flowers has. How is Flowers pious when he's a heretic? Never covers up for bad theology. Yeah, but labeling an argument Pelagian never covers up for whether that's biblical or not. Like, you don't just get to call anything that disagrees with Reformed theology Pelagian. In this article, Bobby, you're not trying to have an exegetical commentary. I get it. You said otherwise. You've done podcasts otherwise, other places. You've done articles other places. Okay, great. But here, all you're doing is labeling a position Pelagianism that inaccurately, and then presuming because Pelagianism supposedly held to it, even though he denied it, therefore it's wrong. That's not a good argument. And saying that something is not one-to-one correlated, but is kind of correlated, and it's similar, therefore he's a Pelagian, is a bad argument too. Saying something might be concerning, but then he's not a Pelagian, but no, wait, he really is, isn't a strong argument. It doesn't make much sense. What I thought was fascinating was this response. So somebody pushes back on him, and he says, if you say Flowers is Pelagian, you have no understanding of what Pelagius believed. Augustine argued against Pelagius in the framework of Pelagius' false presupposition. In the audience, Catholic Church listened to Augustine Pelagius. In the first round, Pelagius beat Augustine. That's what we're talking about. Augustine recovered from his defeat by drawing from his Manichaean Gnostic roots and formulating an argument that ultimately defeated Pelagius, albeit in the eyes of man, yet Augustine's argument was still incorrect. The declaration of a winner is a debate based on the arguments of two men who disagreed with the writings of Paul, something that is historically interesting. The foundation of doctrine is bad. So he says, if you don't understand what it is, Okay. And then Bobby says, dude, I just shared the entailments of Pelagianism in some in this very post. But you didn't, though. You quoted somebody else's summarization of it, and you're factually incorrect. You're historically incorrect about what Pelagianism is, by Augustine's own words, from the synod in which it was condemned. What you're understanding is how latent anthropology riffs on those entailments in big ways, in basic ways. Yeah, they're not Augustinian anthropology. It's a non-Augustinian anthropology. One, that doesn't make it wrong, and two, it doesn't make it Pelagian. He is rather unclear, I dare say, sloppy in the way he communicates how this all works. He'll use the wing. Okay, I guess that's his opinion. I've listened to plenty of LP and Ken Wilson, know what Wilson's errant thesis is. I have formal training in these areas myself. Then how do you get this so wrong? I mean, Armchair Theologian just Googled it, and there popped up Augustine's own words about what the Pelagianism was, and it's not what you say it is. It's not what the guy you quoted says it is. How do you get it so wrong then? This article is just an example of the weak arguments that are out there. How, sort of these similarities and constructed correlations are used to call people heretics, to call people Pelagians. And they don't even get the history right. They can't even make the history fit. And I think what's going on here, if I could make a guess, is that I think that the Calvinist internet bubble is so big and so large and so robust that they don't actually think they're going to be, their articles are going to be looked at with a critical eye. They're just going to have people nodding along like JT does down here. Oh yeah, totally, that's right. That's what Pelagianism is. And they don't think anybody's going to go check, is that what Pelagianism is? Is that the position that was condemned at the synods that he is saying are authoritative for us for some reason? And he doesn't think anybody's going to go look at that because there isn't a robust sort of, how do I say this? There isn't a robust culture of disagreement and argument within Reformed theology online. They just kind of all agree with each other and sweep all disagreement under the rug, unless you're arguing with Lutherans, and then it gets crazy. But they kind of pretend like, and I've heard so many times the phrase, well, Reformed theology says, as if Reformed theology is this ubiquitous sort of view, and they just kind of refuse to in public argue with each other. And so the guys feel like they can put this stuff out and no one's going to look at a critical eye with it. This argument is so weak. He doesn't even try to show beyond some sort of vague similarity as to what Flowers teaches. He puts the locus at free will when that wasn't the locus of the controversy at the time. And just because two people believe in free will doesn't mean they believe in anything else together. Just because two people share free will in common doesn't mean they share any other theology in common or philosophy in common. Just because you agree with Catholics in the Trinity doesn't make you a Catholic. In the same way, just because Pelagians believe that human beings could respond to God's gracious gift of the gospel, and Dr. Flowers believes in free will as a response, that doesn't mean they're the same. It's the same worldview. That's not how this works. The standard is that he's teaching the same thing. That's the standard. The standard isn't, it's kind of sort of similar, not one-to-one, but kind of correlated. Therefore, he's a Pelagian. It's a terrible argument. If you like this content and you would like more response videos like this, hit a subscribe, hit a like, give us a thumbs up. Go join us over at Patreon and help this broadcast to grow.